Hi, I'm Micah Olson. I am sitting here with Randy Lish, who I've worked with a lot on senior planning and things like that. Randy has been a practicing attorney since 1982 and works in estate planning, elder law. Tell me a little bit about what's elder law?
Okay. Elderly clients tend to come up with different problems. You have to make sure they do planning so somebody can take care of things, making decisions if they become incapacitated for any reason. They're more likely to have that problem than people in their 30s and 40s and 50s even. A lot of it involves Medicaid planning when it looks like they're going into a nursing home, so we can preserve assets to cover the things that Medicaid and Medicare don't cover.
Yeah, awesome. And so this is your world.
Yeah, this is what I do.
Awesome. Well, so tell me, general client walks in and says, we need to work on our estate planning, and or we have elderly parents, or we're getting elderly. What do you talk about?
Probably one of the first questions I ask is, well, trying to explain what estate planning is. And basically we're trying to make sure that their assets go where they want to and take care of them. And then when they die, they go where they want them to, the way they want them to, and without incurring a lot of expense. Most people come in having heard about trusts and wills, but the first question I ask is, do you understand the difference between what a trust is and what a will is? 90% of the people say no, and that's the answer I expect.
Yeah.
Because they don't deal with it, they don't know, they hear this is good or this is good. Everybody's concerned about probate, and they're concerned about the government taking everything. And so we go through some information. Basically, a will is a document that says, when I die, this is what happens to my property.
Yep.
And you get to a point who's going to take care of assets for you. If you have minor kids, you always indicate in the will who's going to be the guardian and conservator. And if you have minor kids and something happens to both parents, you don't avoid probate even when you have a trust, because somebody has to appoint that guardian and conservator for the kids that are minors.
Okay.
So that has to be a court.
Yeah.
It can't be somebody else. They don't recognize it legally.
Yeah.
A trust is a document that says, when I die, this is what's going to happen, but I get to have some strings attached. Okay, and that can be important. All of us know families where they'll have 4 or 5 or 6 kids. 1 or 2 will be really responsible, and 1 or 2 won't be really responsible. You can plan for that. You can protect kids from themselves. You can say, okay, this child doesn't manage money well, and it has nothing to do with how intelligent they are. Some people just don't relate to money. I mean, some people, it doesn't matter to them. And so you can say in the trust, okay, you're going to pay the mortgage and taxes and utilities each month, or you're going to pay the rent and utilities each month. So that way they've got a place to live.
Yeah.
And nothing happens if they forget to take care of business sometimes.
Yeah, as opposed to a big lump sum.
Lump sum all at once. If you get a lump sum all at once, there's lots of different ideas. There are pros and cons each way. If you give them a little bit every few years, or upon certain things happening, then you can manage it a lot more, and they're not going to blow everything. However, if you get 30,000 here and 30,000 here and 30,000 here, it's really easy to blow it. Instead of, if you get 100,000 or 120,000, it's really easy to put it on your mortgage, and you can see a huge difference because you can refinance and get a lot lower payment, so you have an immediate impact on your lifestyle. And you have to decide what you want to do based on your own family circumstances and your kids and what they're like, and things like that. So
that's interesting, because I would have personally thought smaller amounts over time as opposed to a big lump sum. That's
it's easy to squander $30,000, because if you take $30,000 and apply it on your mortgage, it doesn't make a difference.
Feel like
if you get $150,000 and pay off your mortgage, you feel an immediate change in your economic circumstances.
Yeah. Awesome, interesting idea.
So you have to plan for that. You can plan for that. It just depends on your circumstances and what your kids are like, and if which ones need the help in managing money. Some people don't care about investments. They don't care about, can I get a good return on my money? They just they don't have an interest in that.
Yeah. So when people come in and you have that first meeting or first couple of meetings, what questions do they usually have? What are people wondering?
Okay, they're wondering, what the difference between a trust and will is. They really don't know. What do we do when we do estate planning? They always ask about probate, and I will tell you, probate is not a big bugaboo. It's there for a reason, and sometimes you have to go through it. It should not take a long period of time unless kids are fighting, but that's litigation. That's not probate.
Right. Interesting.
And so, they have that. Lots of people come in thinking the government's going to get everything, and I tell them the estate tax exclusion amount this year is $13,610,000.
How close are you to that?
if you're like literally 99.6% of the population, that's not even a consideration.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about it. And a few years and it drops in half because the legislation expires. But even how many of you have a $7 million estate?
Yeah. So just question, not to get off topic, but is life insurance included in that? So if I was worth $1 million, but I had $10 million in life insurance, which would be unbalanced. But that's part of your estate.
Your estate consists of any assets that you own.
Yeah, okay.
So if you own the policy, now if somebody else owns it, then you have other tax implications for income taxes and things like that.
Yeah.
For who's paying the premium and what how to deal with that. Yeah. Business owners have to worry about that. Most individuals don't.
Yeah. So those are the questions they do ask. What are the questions they should ask? Or are they usually the same?
They're usually the same. They come in. The biggest thing is they don't know. And so they ask the questions, and then they understand what we're doing and why, and what our options are going to be.
Yeah. So we talked about the simple estate plan.
The simple estate plan.
What's a more complex plan going to look like?
Okay. You've got somebody who has business holdings or real estate or substantial amounts in investments, and it's not more complicated planning because you still don't have a tax issue. Unless they've got a lot,
right?
And I mean, several $1 million. If somebody comes in with a $3 million estate, unless they've got a business that's really going gangbusters, they're not going to triple it in a short period of time. And I know, so you can put together a good estate plan, and the complexity sometimes isn't based on how large the estate is, but what kind of distribution schedule they want. How do they want it distributed and to whom? How much tailoring for that? So that's a lot of it. But if you the more you get, the more you need to do planning, because the more likely it is to have an impact on the lives of the people that you work with.
Yeah.
If somebody's going to inherit $10,000, it's not going to have much of an impact on their standard of living.
Right. Yeah.
If they're going to inherit $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000, then that's more important that you do planning.
Yeah. So when should somebody start on their estate plan?
Well, basically, if they've got kids.
Yeah.
Because if you're single and you don't have much and you don't care where it goes, you should do something, but it's not going to affect anybody. If you've got little kids, then you need to at least have a will and a power of attorney and a healthcare directive in place. Because in the will is where you decide who gets to be the guardian and conservator of the minor kids. That's important.
Yeah.
That's an important issue. If you've got minor kids, you're not going to avoid probate. I know a lot of people market their trust because you avoid probate. That's an advantage, but it's not the most important advantage. Right. And it's not always true. If you've got minor kids, you still have to go to the probate court and have the guardian and conservator appointed by the court.
Yep. Because that's coming from the will.
Yeah.
You can't transfer ownership of your children to a trust or an entity.
And the biggest problem is, if you're trying to register the kids in school, and you're not the guardian or parent, you can't register in school in a lot of districts. So you have to have something that says you're legally entitled or you're legally responsible for. You can't just say, I'm going to do it and then do it. That's not how the world works anymore.
Yeah. So maybe kind of a morbid question. When is it too late to start putting together an estate plan?
If they become incompetent, and I have had clients wait too long, and once they become incompetent, they can't do it.
Yeah.
If they've had some planning done and they've got a durable power of attorney in place, depending on how well drafted that a power of attorney is, they may or may not be able to. But if they, you can't wait too long.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point about how well drafted the power of attorney is. I've had experiences in the past with estates where somebody knew someone was going downhill quick. They ran to Office Depot and got the form of power of attorney, and the title companies won't accept it.
Yeah.
What should adult children who have aging parents, where do you start?
That's really hard. It's a discussion you have to make sure that they've got planning in place. There are lots of reasons for that, but basically you just have to get up the courage to talk to your parents and say, have you done planning? Do you know what's going to happen? And make sure they understand it's not you're concerned about what you're going to get, but you want to make sure that, number one, you minimize the risk of fighting, but also you want to make sure that they know what they want.
Yeah, right. Which is in estate planning that I've done. It seems like there's a lot more thought than there is, paper.
They have to think about it. See, and my initial consultation will usually take an hour to an hour and a half, and I send a questionnaire out ahead of time that they can fill out as much as they can, and then we go through that, and then I do a lot of educating on what's the difference between a trust and a will, and what are the options, and why do you want the flexibility of a trust, or why don't you? That takes. But I've also found it takes some time for clients to feel comfortable disclosing to me family dynamics that I need to know to plan properly.
Yeah, interesting. I'm thinking through lots of scenarios where, especially with a trust, where how we're distributing assets and why. Interesting.
Well, if you have a child who owns a business, or they're in a profession that's high risk, the best asset protection plan available is for mom and dad to leave it to the kids in trust. They don't get to demand a distribution, but the trust can own assets that the kids can then use. That's good asset protection.
And if there was ever a liability event created or contrived,
it's protected.
Couldn't attach.
Dentists and doctors are sued frequently for malpractice. Well, that protects assets. And if a trust set up by mom and dad buys all of the equipment for the dental practice, then the dentist gets sued. They can't take the assets because he doesn't own them. He uses them. He has a right to use, but he doesn't own.
So you can do a lot of really cool things with a trust then.
You can do a lot. It's very flexible, and that's the flexibility it gives you is really beneficial.
So can the average person afford a trust? Is this for the rich people kind of a thing?
There are attorneys out there that'll do it for $1,000 to $1,500. I charge more than that, but I know some that charge $4,000 or $5,000, and they still get it. So the ones that pay the most get the most hand holding, and they get the most time put in that. But if you can find it, you can find some attorney that'll give you a good price on it.
And the young couple that right now maybe just needs a will, power of attorney,
and health care directive. For $500 or $600 you can get the whole package. And so it's worth it to them, and it's something that they really need as long as they've got minor kids.
And I was thinking, we all talk about paying for kids going through college and things like that. Kind of seems like when you become a grandparent, maybe you say, hey, not an exciting gift, but I'll pay for you to put a will together, as long as you make me the guardian.
Well, it depends on the age of you and the kids sometimes.
That's true.
There's a reason you have kids in your 30s and 40s and not your 50s and 60s.
Exactly. All right, Randy, so is estate planning only about what happens with assets or children or things when you passed away?
No. And here's what a lot of people don't understand. Okay, again, think of the advantages of will and a trust. A will it's cheap and easy initially. A trust is more expensive to set up because, number one, you have more flexibility after you die, but also before you die, if you become disabled, you can dictate in the trust what's going to happen. So you have that flexibility to do some planning ahead of time. And when you start doing the planning, you have to start looking at your circumstances all the way across the board. Elderly people come in and they need Medicaid planning more frequently than they realize. If they're looking at going into a nursing home in the very near future, usually within a couple, 3 weeks, it's considered to be crisis planning. And you have to do some Medicaid planning so that they don't spend down all of their assets and then get on Medicaid.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. So, I've never thought a lot about Medicaid planning at all. Do most people know that you need planning?
No.
Okay.
No,
I
they don't.
figured
No, they don't.
mom has a stroke or something like that. We need assisted living. We apply for Medicaid, but
Yeah. See, and there are some things. Okay. Lots of rules that, and just to go over the rules in general, when you apply for Medicaid, number one, Medicaid covers care in a nursing home. It does not cover assisted living facilities or independent living facilities. You have to pay for that on your own. To qualify for Medicaid, the individual going into the nursing home can only have $2,000 in assets, plus assets that are considered exempt. So if you have a house and an intent to return to the house, or a spouse or minor or disabled child living in it, that is an exempt asset. One car is an exempt asset. Your furnishings and personal property are considered exempt assets. But then if you have savings or 401ks and IRAs, that all has to be spent down. And if you're single, you can only keep $2,000. If you've got more than that, you don't qualify for Medicaid until you've spent it down. And the reason you need Medicaid planning, Medicaid and Medicare don't cover all of the costs. Okay, I've had a nursing home administrator who told me many months ago that she has several patients, and I don't know how many that is, but several patients at a nursing home who, if they could get 5 days of occupational therapy every day for 3 or 4 weeks, for 5 days a week for 3 or 4 weeks, they could go home. But Medicaid and Medicare only pay for 5 days.
Whew.
So if you can pay for the additional need, you could be off of Medicaid.
Yeah.
So
better quality of life, saving
better quality
money.
of life, saving money for both them and the government. Lots of advantages, but the system isn't set up that way. And so what we try to do, we need to, and that's just one example of where you think needs can come up and they're not covered by the government. So if you spend your assets down to $2,000, how do you get those benefits that you need? You can't.
Yeah.
That's just it. You stay in the nursing home because you don't have enough money to pay for the care you need that would get you out.
Yeah.
That's why you do Medicaid planning. And if you're married, the spouse can keep whatever income they have. If their income is below a certain level, then some of the income from the spouse going into the nursing home can be transferred over, and so they have a minimum amount to live on.
Yeah.
So there are lots of rules that you have to follow, but that Medicaid planning can be an important part, because if you do proper planning, we can generally preserve 40 to 80 or 90% of the estate from having to be spent down.
Interesting. Yeah. How long does that take? I mean, I assume if someone needs to go into a nursing home, they don't have
They
4 weeks.
Yeah, no, you can usually get the planning in place within a week or 10 days.
Wow, that's awesome.
If everybody gets their signatures and gets things, they have to be on top of things. They can't delay like they do sometimes.
So, question for you, because I originally used the word assisted living, and you said it'll pay for a nursing home, not assisted living.
Right.
What's the difference?
Okay, the level of care that's required.
Okay, and nursing homes more care. Okay,
You have to have more care. You have 5 activities of daily living, and you have to have help in at least 2 of those. So bathing, mobility, dressing, cooking, eating, things like that. If you have to qualify for a nursing home level of care, you have to require help in at least 2 of those 5.
Okay, interesting. That's really interesting to know. So a place that is called an assisted living place, if they're providing 3 of those 5, could qualify, or maybe not.
No, because you'd have to be in a nursing home set up to this.
Interesting.
And so a lot of the people in the assisted living facilities don't qualify for Medicaid, and Medicaid just doesn't cover, so they have to go into a nursing home to get that
Interesting.
level
And it's
of
just
care.
the classification of the place and the number of items they need care for. Interesting.
We do have a program for assisted living facilities, but you have to self-pay for a year, and then you can go through a process and get qualified into that program. It's similar to Medicaid, but not exactly the same.
Interesting.
You don't think you have to qualify, but I know some attorneys that do Medicaid planning don't deal with that program just because you don't have guarantees that they're going to get
Right.
in
Yeah,
if they qualify.
Interesting.
So
Yeah. How often would you say, percentage-wise or numbers, how common is it to have Medicaid planning that becomes a part of an estate plan?
not as often as it should. A lot of the people in nursing homes, they've spent everything down, and then they get on Medicaid. And if I would bet half of them, if they would, maybe I don't know,
A
because
lot.
a lot of people, if they would come in and do some planning, we could preserve even $50 or $60 or $70,000 for them.
Yeah, well, even with things of like pre-gifting to
You have to be careful.
beneficiaries.
Yeah,
and
you have to be
stuff.
careful with that because there's a
Okay.
5-year look back.
Oh,
So
interesting.
you can see, when you apply for Medicaid, they're gonna go back and see if you have made any gifts.
Shifted assets and gifting. Interesting.
They'll look
Okay.
back 5 years.
So
you
there's
have
a lot going
you
into
have-
it. It's not
you
a.
have to, yeah, it's not something you do off the cuff. You have to
Yeah.
put some thought and planning into it.
So when an elderly person is looking at estate planning, they don't have any major medical problems yet. They're not needing
they
assisted
don't need
living
assisted living.
or nursing home yet. I mean,
Uh-huh.
how far in advance do you start
Okay.
thinking, what if?
Okay, and that's a good question. The problem we have, when you do Medicaid planning, it's like an insurance policy. You don't know if you're ever gonna need it.
Right.
And that people don't want to pay. It's expensive to do Medicaid planning because there's a lot more involved than just simple estate planning for, and even tax planning for wealthy people. But the goal of estate planning is to maintain ownership and control and have flexibility. The goal of Medicaid planning is to get assets out of your name and control, but still have somebody that can use those assets to pay for things that you need.
Yeah.
And so the goals are almost the opposite.
Yeah.
When you start doing, again, most of the time people will come in, they're looking at going into a nursing home in the very immediate future, and that's when they start doing Medicaid planning, and that's okay because you do it planning. Well, they're not gonna need it for 5 years. You don't know that,
Right. Yeah.
and so you do the planning, and then you have to be careful, but also. They may never need to go to a nursing home.
Yeah.
I mean, all of us know somebody in their late 80s or early 90s who's doing just fine at home.
Yeah.
And so they may
Interesting.
never need to go into a nursing home.
Interesting.
People don't want to pay the high fees for Medicaid planning when they may never need it.
Right. But it sounds like when the need does arise, it still is doable and
It's
certainly better than not doing anything.
Yes. And I tell clients, you don't ever apply for Medicaid until you've at least talked to an elder law attorney to see if there's a plan that can be put in place to preserve
Yeah.
some assets that can pay
Yeah.
for the things that are not covered.
And it sounds like a lot of people who don't have health planning, they just pay the
Uh-huh.
7, 8, 9, 10, 12,000 a month until they have nothing,
Uh-huh.
and
Then
then
they
go in,
then they go in, then they go on Medicaid.
and then they can't ever get off
Yeah.
at that point.
Yeah.
Any other things people should know? Questions people ask?
The biggest thing is people don't know. They don't know what estate planning is. They really don't understand the difference between a will and a trust, or what they're for. They don't understand. I have a lot of people say, well, if I have a trust, do I need a will? Yes.
Yeah.
There are some things, okay. Attorneys say, well, if you have a trust, you can avoid probate. And I say, sometimes.
Yeah.
If you have minor kids, you can't avoid
Yeah,
probate
that's-
because you've got to go to court and have somebody appointed guardian and conservator if something happens to mom and dad.
Yep.
So you don't always avoid probate, even if there is a trust. Now, it makes it better, easier to administer down the road if you have a trust, but you still have to go through probate to get that court appointment. Because if you don't, you can't get your kids into school because
Right.
the districts don't recognize
Yeah.
them.
or medical care
Medical
or
care or
things that you
anything,
need a
yeah.
guardian for.
Yeah, you have to have a guardian and conservator for some of those things.
Yeah. I appreciate you taking the time to chat. I'm sure there's going to be other comments and questions and things. If anybody has a comment or question, post them in the comments before, and I'll
be glad to respond
touch
and
back with you.
explain to them what answers we can give them about their questions.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.